Her name appeared on the third page of the debt ledger, entered between a writing desk valued at £12 and a pair of silver candlesticks worth £9, as though the man who had written it could not quite decide whether she was furniture or silver, and had simply placed her between them to avoid the question. One line, no age, no history, no indication that the item in question breathed or woke before dawn each morning to bank the fires, or had spent 8 years learning to make herself invisible in a house that had never once belonged to her. Just a name, a value, £40, and a column heading that read, in the same careful copperplate used for the candlesticks, included with household effects at time of transfer. The new Duke of Carwell read that line. Then he read it again. The room had been warm before that moment, or at least warmer than it would shortly become. There were 6 men in it, 2 solicitors, a magistrate's clerk, Graham Westhorn, the estate's current master, and a pair of assessors from the creditor's office, and they had all been proceeding in the comfortable way that men proceed when they expect a transaction to take no longer than it requires. The Duke of Carwell had arrived at Westhorn Manor at 10:30, had spoken very little, had been shown the rooms, had walked the grounds without apparent interest in anything he was shown, and had returned to the study to review the ledger with the manner of a man who had done this many times before, and intended to do it many times again. He was not the sort of man who showed what he was thinking. Nell had understood that the moment he stepped out of the carriage. She had been carrying a coal scuttle across the rear courtyard, and she had stopped, and she had watched him cross the yard without looking at her at all. And she had noted the plainness of the coat and the quality of the horses, and she had thought, "This man does not need anyone to know what he is." The ones who did, she had learned, always made sure you knew before they had finished crossing the drive. She should have gone back to the kitchen. 8 years of this house had trained her thoroughly in the wisdom of not being present when men of consequence arrived. But she set the coal scuttle down, and she stayed where she was, at the edge of the yard, and she watched through the study window because she had always been better at reading the shape of a thing from a distance than she ever was up close. She watched him turn the pages of the ledger slowly. She watched him stop. She could not see his face from where she stood, but she saw his hand go still on the page, the index finger resting just below a line she could not read but knew, because she had lived with the knowledge of it since the morning Graham Westhorn had called her into this same study 4 months ago and told her, with his hands folded on his desk in the way of a man announcing nothing of importance, that the estate was being sold to settle his debts, and that she would be listed accordingly, and that she ought not to concern herself with the particulars. She had not wept. She had learned, some years back, that weeping cost more than it returned. She watched the Duke read the line a second time with the same slow deliberateness, and then he lifted his head, and his eyes moved across the room, and for one moment, a moment she would not be able to account for afterward, they came to rest on the window where she stood. Whether he could see her clearly through the wavy old glass, she could not tell. She did not step back. She had been trained to make herself small and still and overlooked, and for 8 years that training had served her. But she did not step back. Something crossed his face that she could not name. Then he turned and spoke to the solicitor, and the words did not carry through the glass, but she watched the solicitor blink twice and look confused and reach into his leather case, and she watched the Duke set the ledger aside and accept from the man a sheet of clean paper and a pen. Not to sign with. She understood that immediately, because the ledger was still closed and signing a transfer required the ledger open to the relevant page. He wrote something on the separate sheet. He wrote for longer than a signature requires. He folded it once, and held it for a moment, and then handed it back to the solicitor with a word she could not lip-read, but which seemed, from the solicitor's face, to be an instruction rather than a question. The solicitor nodded. He put the paper into his case. The Duke picked up the pen a second time and signed the estate transfer, and Nell stood in the cold of the courtyard and understood that something had just happened in that room that she did not yet have the language to describe. It was Ada who told her, that same evening, that the Duke wished to speak with her in the morning. Ada was 70 if she was a day, had cooked for 3 successive families in that house, and had a constitution for bad news that Nell had always found admirable. She delivered the message the way she delivered most things, plainly at the kitchen table, without making eye contact, with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that she had no intention of sharing. "The Duke's man came to the back door an hour ago," Ada said. "Quiet fellow, very correct. He said His Grace will return at 9 o'clock and wishes to speak to the girl listed in the household ledger as collateral domestic female." She paused. Those were his words, not His Grace's, the man's. He read them from a card. Nell sat down. Listed as collateral domestic female. She had known, in the abstract way one knows an unpleasant thing, that this was how she appeared in the document. Hearing it read aloud was a different matter. "Why would he want to speak with me?" she said. Ada finally looked at her. She had the look of a woman who has been keeping a thing unsaid for a very long time and is deciding at last whether this is the moment to say it. "You hold yourself like a person who was taught to hold herself," Ada said. "Not trained, taught. There is a difference, and anyone who has worked in a house long enough knows it. I have never said anything because it was not my place, and because a girl who does not know what she has lost is sometimes better off not knowing. But if a duke is asking after you by name out of a household ledger—" She stopped. "Just be there at 9, and hold your head up when you speak to him." Nell lay awake most of that night. She did not have much to review. 8 years in this house had given her very little in the way of a history, because the history she had been given when she arrived. Your father's debts, the bond, the arrangement, had always been someone else's story about her. And she had never fully believed it the way one believes a thing one has lived through personally. She had been 12 years old when she came. She remembered a carriage, rain on a dark road, a woman's voice, not unkind, saying, "Be good, be quiet. Don't let them take what you carry," and a small cold weight pressed into her palm that she had kept ever since, sewn into the seam of her apron, touched each night the way a person touches a thing they are afraid of losing. Half of a ring, gold, worn smooth at the edges, the crest too small to read without a glass, but she knew every curve of it by feel. She had never known, in 8 years, what the crest was. She had never known who the woman in the carriage was. She had been told her mother was dead before she arrived at this house, and she had believed it because 12-year-olds believe what grown people tell them, and because there had been no reason offered to doubt it, and because doubt, in this house, cost more than certainty. He came at 9:05 alone, no solicitor, no clerk. Nell was in the great hall when he entered, standing near the cold hearth in the same gray dress she wore every day of her life in that house, because she had nothing finer, and had not been able to think of a way to seem other than what she appeared to be. She had thought about that in the small hours. She was exactly what she looked like. A girl who had spent 8 years becoming invisible, and there was nothing to be done about it in one night. The Duke of Carwell looked at her for a moment before he spoke. He was, she saw now, younger than she had first taken him for. 30, perhaps a little more. The plainness of his dress was not economy but preference, the kind that comes from having no need to demonstrate anything to anyone. His face gave away nothing, but it did not seem unkind, and she had learned to measure people by the small space between those two things. He said, "You know who I am." "Your Grace, yes." "And you know that I purchased this estate yesterday." "Yes, Your Grace." He looked at her steadily. He had the look of a man checking something against a memory, and she had the unsettling impression that she was either confirming or contradicting something he had already half decided. "I want to ask you one question," he said. "I would like you to answer it as precisely as you are able. When you came to this house, not the year, I know the year, but the day itself. Do you remember the day you arrived? Anything of it? How old you were? Who brought you? What season it was? Anything at all, however small?" It was the question she had never been asked. In 8 years, not one person in this house had ever asked her who she had been before she arrived in it. She reached back, the way you reach for something you know is there but cannot immediately locate. She found the same few fragments she had always found: the carriage, the rain, the dark road, the woman's voice. She was 12, she thought, or close to it. It was autumn. She remembered that distinctly, the smell of it, that particular cold that comes before the cold becomes simply winter. And a weight in her hand, pressed there at the last moment, before the carriage door closed. "Don't let them take what you carry." "I was 12, she said. "It was autumn. A woman brought me, not her own carriage, I think, because the driver did not know the road well. She told me to be good and not let anyone take what I carried, and then she left. And I was here." He was very still. "What did you carry?" Nell looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the seam of her apron, the careful hidden seam she had unpicked, and restitched 100 times over 8 years, and she drew out the half-ring and held it on her open palm. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He looked at what she held without touching it. She watched his face change, which was the most remarkable thing she had seen in years, because his face had seemed the kind that did not change. Something broke open in it, briefly, and what came through was not surprise exactly, but a kind of terrible recognition. The recognition of a thing you have been looking for, long enough that you have begun to doubt it exists. He put his hand inside his coat and drew out something small wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. It was the other half of the ring. Nell's hand closed around her half without meaning to. He said, very quietly, "I have been looking for this for 8 years. I have been looking for the child it belongs to." He paused. "You were 12 when you came here. That is." He stopped. He turned away briefly. When he turned back, his face was controlled again, but the control cost him something visible. He told her then. He told her the way a person tells the truth, when they have been carrying it alone for a very long time, and the weight has finally become heavier than the telling. Her name, her real name, the one she'd been brought to this house without, the one that had been buried in a parish register 8 years ago under the heading "Died of Fever, 14th October," was Corbryce. Her father had been Sir Harland, a man she had no memory of except the ring in her palm and the shape of a word that had been kept from her. He had died when she was 11, a year before she came to West Horn. He had left everything to her: the house, the land, the income of a considerable estate in the north, and he had left it to a child who had no brother, no uncle with a legal claim, nothing standing between her and the men who managed the estate and had for years managed it as though it were already theirs. Chief among them, a man named Norbert Langsley, a second cousin who stood next in line to inherit if the child died. He had not been able to bring himself to have the child killed, but he had found Graham West Horn, a man always in need, always for sale, and he had paid him to take the living child far away, put her to work in a house where no one would ever think to look, enter her in a ledger under a common name, and keep her there for as long as it took for the world to forget she had ever existed. Langsley had taken the estate. He had continued paying Westhorn year by year, a sum small enough to resent and large enough to rely on. For 8 years, Corinna Bryce had been Nell, a household servant in a Yorkshire manor, entered in a debt ledger between a writing desk and a set of candlesticks, valued at £40. The Duke of Carwell had known her father. He had visited her family's estate twice as a young man, had seen the child, had been given the other half of the signet ring by her father himself, in case, the old man had said. In case anything happens and someone needs to prove who she is, there is no other proof that cannot be forged. This they cannot forge. He had heard of her death. He had believed it. For 6 years he had believed it, until one afternoon his solicitor, reviewing an old case of contested inheritance, had mentioned a name in a document that should not have contained it. A name that matched the one written inside the split ring, the one her father had used only at home, the private name, the one no parish register had ever recorded, because it was too small and too personal for official documents. He had followed the name here. She stood in the great hall with both halves of the ring in her hands, and she did not cry, though she understood suddenly why she had never been able to make herself stop touching it each night. It was not habit. It was the body's memory doing what the mind could not. "Who else knows?" she said. No one yet. He sat across from her, not opposite the way a master sits across from a servant, but across the way one equal sits across from another, in chairs he had drawn out himself. "I came alone because I needed to see the ring first, and to see you." He paused. "I need to take this to a court, both halves together, with the inscription and the crest that matches your father's seal on a dozen recorded documents. That is the beginning of a proof that can stand. But first I need you to understand what you are walking into. Langsley has had 8 years and a fortune's income to prepare for the possibility of this day. He will not concede quietly." She looked at him. She had spent 8 years being overlooked, and she had used every one of those years to watch people carefully. And she was watching him now. "You wrote something yesterday," she said, "before you signed the transfer. On a separate sheet of paper. What was it?" He looked at her for a moment. Then, something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face. "A protection declaration," he said. "Filed last night with my solicitor in London. It states that the individual listed as collateral, domestic, female, in item 47 of the Westhorn Household Debt Register has, as of the date of the estate transfer, been taken into the protection of the Duke of Carwell as a free subject, not a debtor, not an indentured servant, not a household effect. Her legal status to be determined by a court of law." He paused. "It is witnessed. It is filed. It is dated 12 days before any countermeasure Langsley could have prepared." She understood the shape of it before he finished. Langsley would move to have her seized. She was certain of it. Now that she knew what she was worth to him, he would have a writ prepared. But a writ names a piece of property, and a filed, witnessed, signed declaration said there was no property here, only a person, and a question attached to her that required a court to answer. The declaration was older than any writ Langsley could produce. That was the whole of it. He had written it the morning after reading the ledger, before he knew who she was or why she was there, because he was a man who could not look at a line like that and simply sign his name beneath it. Langsley moved faster than she had expected. Within a week of the Duke's visit, a letter arrived at Westhorn Manor that made Westhorn go pale in a way she had never seen him go pale before. He did not speak to Nell. He spoke to no one. He spent an afternoon in his study and emerged looking like a man who has been given a choice he did not expect to be offered and is not certain which answer will cost him less. She found out from Ada, who had a gift for doorways. "Langsley is coming," Ada said. "He knows the Duke has been here, someone told him. He is going to arrive and make this girl disappear again, That is his intention. And West Horn is frightened because the money has stopped, and there is nothing now between him and everything he has done." Then Ada set down her cup and looked at Nell with an expression that was almost fierce. "Send word to the Duke tonight," she said. "Go yourself if you must. Do not wait for anyone's permission to do the thing that keeps you alive." She went herself. It was 9 miles to the nearest posting inn where the Duke's household had taken rooms, and she covered it on a borrowed horse in the dark. And she was not afraid of the dark. She had been afraid of quieter things for 8 years, and she arrived with her hair down and mud on her hem, and both halves of the ring held together in her closed fist. He came down to the inn's parlor in a coat thrown over his nightshirt, and he looked at her, cold, wet, upright, and he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, there is a fire." She sat. She told him everything Ada had said. She told him Langsley was coming. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Good, let him come." She looked at him. "He is walking into open ground," the Duke said. "He thinks the declaration is a minor obstacle. A rich man's eccentricity, easily argued around. He does not know about the ring. He does not know I have a letter from your father with the crest on the seal that matches it. He does not know I intend to file a legal challenge to the inheritance the moment the court opens Monday morning. He thinks he has 8 years of preparation, and I have 2 weeks of interest. He is wrong about which of us has been preparing longer." He looked at her steadily. "I have been preparing for 8 years. I simply did not know for whom." Langsley arrived the following morning with a solicitor, a clerk, and a constable carrying a writ. He was not what she had imagined. She had built him, over the last 2 days, into something large and cold, a man with a face shaped like a threat. In fact, he was slight, well-dressed, with the air of a man who had spent 8 years being comfortable and had come to mistake comfort for invulnerability. He entered West Horn's front hall with the ease of a man walking into a room he owns, which was, she reflected, precisely what he believed he was doing. The Duke of Carwell was already there. Langsley stopped. She watched him take in the Duke and recalculate, the way a man recalculates when he finds the room differently arranged than he expected. "Your Grace," he said, "I did not know you would be." "I own this estate," the Duke said. "I am generally present at estates I own." Langsley smiled. He had a good smile, the kind that had probably worked on people for years. "Of course. I beg your pardon. I have come on a small matter of—" He glanced at Nell, who was standing near the wall of household administration. "There is a girl here who has been listed, in error, in the estate transfer documentation, and I have a writ to correct the record and return her to her proper arrangement elsewhere." The constable held out the writ. The Duke took it. He read it. He said, "This writ names an indentured servant." "That is correct." "There is no indentured servant at this address." He set the writ on the hall table. "There is a free subject under my legal protection, as recorded in a declaration filed with my London solicitor 12 days ago, witnessed by 6 men, and registered with the Court of Common Pleas." He took the copy from his coat, worn now from being carried close, and laid it beside the writ. The filing stamp was on the lower right corner. The date was plainly visible. He looked at Langsley. "Your writ is dated 4 days ago. My declaration is dated 12 days ago. The declaration is the older document. It is also the registered one. Your writ names a piece of property. The law has already recorded in a document older than your writ that there is no such property here." The constable looked at the 2 documents. He was a careful, unhurried sort of man, and he read both items through twice. Then he looked at Langsley with the expression of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on belongs to someone else. Langsley's smile had not disappeared, but it had changed into something thinner. "You are involving yourself in a matter you do not fully understand," he said to the Duke. "The girl is nobody. She is a servant. Whatever story she has told you." "She told me," Nell said, "that she came to this house at 12 years of age carrying half of a ring." The hall went quiet. She had not planned to speak, but she found, standing there in the gray dress she had worn every day for 8 years, that she was done with being a thing spoken about by men in the same room as her. She opened her hand. Both halves of the ring lay on her palm, fitted together so precisely that you had to look twice to see the seam between them. Langsley looked at the ring. Something moved behind his face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition of a calculation gone badly wrong. "That is nothing," he said. "A trinket. Easily." "The crest matches documents bearing my father's seal," the Duke said. 17 of them, 2 lodged in the public record office, and several more in the possession of my solicitor. He spoke quietly and without emphasis, the way a man speaks when he has no need of performance. "Your cousin's Christian name is engraved inside the larger half, while his wife's initial is engraved inside the smaller. The inscription is in a hand my solicitor has already compared against 3 letters signed by Sir Harland and found consistent." He looked at Langsley. "It is not a trinket. It is a family object, split and given to a child so that she could be found if she was ever lost. You knew that 8 years ago when you handed her to Westhorn. And Westhorn," he added, "has already agreed to provide testimony." Nell looked at Westhorn. He was standing near the study door with the expression of a man who has made the only choice available to him and is trying not to look as though it cost him anything. The constable lowered the writ. "I will not serve this," he said slowly, "and to no one in particular. Not when there is a filed prior declaration naming this lady a free subject and evidence of identity that will want a proper court to sort." He folded the writ back into his leather folder. "This is above my station, and I will carry it back and let them settle it in open court, where this kind of thing belongs." He looked briefly at Nell. Something in his weathered face approximated respect. "Begging your pardon, miss, I have a feeling this writ stank from the start." He went, the door closed. Langsley stood for a moment longer. He was not a man who ran, she could see that. He was a man who adapted. But in this particular room, on this particular morning, there was nothing left to adapt toward, and after a moment he took his solicitor by the sleeve, and he went out, and the carriage took him down the long drive, and Ada, who had been standing in the passage the entire time, came in and handed Nell a cup of tea she had no memory of asking for. The court took 4 months. She was there for all of it. She sat beside the Duke's solicitor in the gallery and listened while the documents were read and the witnesses spoke and the ring was passed along the bench, first one half and then the other, the crest matching under every pair of hands that held it. Westhorn testified for 3 hours. He was not a brave man, and he was not an honest one, but he was a man who had finally done the mathematics and found that the sum came out differently than he had expected. Langsley's lawyers were excellent and well paid, and raised a great many objections. The Duke's lawyers raised fewer objections and asked better questions, and at the end of the 4th month the court made its determination. And it was not a difficult determination once the evidence was properly before people who were permitted to see it. The estate had always belonged to Corinna Bryce. It had belonged to her the day her father died. It had belonged to her through 8 years of absence, through a false parish record and a falsified death, through £40 in a household ledger and a line entered between furniture. Langsley had possessed it under false pretense, and the court had a word for that, and the word was theft. She went north in May, when the roads were good, and the light lasted long into the evening. The Duke rode with her because she asked him to, and because he had spent 8 years looking for her and had no particular interest in being elsewhere. She had expected her family's estate to feel like something, like coming home, like recognition. She had expected to step out of the carriage and feel the ground under her feet and know it. She stepped out of the carriage and looked at the house and felt nothing except cold, which was disappointing for approximately 10 seconds. And then she realized that what she felt was not nothing. It was simply the wrong kind of feeling. It was not the feeling of returning to a place you had always known. It was the feeling of arriving somewhere for the first time that nevertheless had the courtesy to feel like yours. She stood in the drive and thought, I will learn it. I have time. Ada came north with her. Ada said she was too old to learn a new kitchen, and why die in that case in a familiar one? And besides, someone needed to make sure the girl ate properly, and the Duke's cook, with respect, had no idea how to season a broth. The Duke said nothing to this, except that there appeared to be room enough in the household for two opinions on the matter of broth. They married in September, quietly, in the small church at the edge of the estate, and it was not the kind of wedding anyone had particularly planned. They had both spent too many years being arranged and assessed by other people to have much appetite for ceremony. He asked her in the library, with no preamble, one evening in July. And she said yes with no preamble, because there had been no one else in it for her since the morning he sat across from her in that cold hall and asked, as though it were the most natural question in the world, what she remembered of the day she arrived. No one had ever asked who she was before. That was the whole of it when she turned it over. In 8 years, not one person had thought to wonder. The debt ledger from Westhorn Manor hung framed on the wall of the study in the house that was hers. She had wanted to burn it. He had asked her not to. It is the worst thing ever written about me, she said. It is a list of household effects with my name between the furniture. It is also, he said, the document I read when I wrote the declaration. Without it, I had no reason to write it. Without it, there was no prior document to stop the writ. She looked at it for a long time. The third page. Her name, £40, included with household effects, and below it on the same page, in the firm different hand of a copy she had made herself, the declaration transcribed in full. The individual listed above is taken into the protection of the Duke of Carwell as a free subject. Her status to be determined at law and not by this ledger. Visitors sometimes read the ledger and went very still, and then read the second document below it, in the different hand, and understood, without being told, that the same page held the crime and its undoing. On the morning of the wedding, Ada helped her dress and talked too much and wept once and then denied it. And when the last pin was in, she held Corinna by the shoulders and looked at her the way she had looked at her across a kitchen table on the night all of this began. You always knew, Corinna said. I suspected, Ada said. Knowing and suspecting are different things. But yes, I knew. She smoothed a crease in the sleeve that did not need smoothing. I also knew it was not my place to say so. A girl who does not know what she has lost is sometimes safer for not knowing. But you were never nothing, child. They just entered you incorrectly. On the desk by the window, in the morning light, lay the pen. She had kept it. The Duke's pen, the one he had used the morning after reading the ledger, when he wrote the declaration before he knew her name or her history or anything about her except that a line in a ledger had entered a person between a writing desk and a pair of candlesticks and called her a household effect, and he had set the ledger aside and reached for a separate sheet of paper because some lines cannot simply be signed beneath. She picked it up and turned it in the light. She thought of a gray morning and a cold hall and a man reading a document all the way to the third page, where the cheap things went. She thought of the half ring on her palm and his face when he looked at it, and the way recognition had broken through his composure, the way light breaks through a window that has been shuttered too long. She set the pen down. Below in the yard, the horses were being readied, and Ada was calling for someone to bring the good gloves and not the everyday ones, for pity's sake. And Corinna Bryce went down to be married. Not listed beneath anyone, not 40 pounds, not a household effect. Just her name, in full, at the top of something that had always been hers.